Bob Dauster, the Field68.com with us on 365 Sports. Dan Hurley's decision to spurn the Lakers, stay at UConn, and I want to do that. We'll get into that. That's why I contacted you, but the loss of Jerry West just a couple of weeks or so after Bill Walton, Jerry West robbed the logo of the NBA.
Yeah, it's sad that we've lost two legends of the sport, two guys that are iconic within the game of basketball itself. I don't know how many people can identify with a broadcaster as much as they identify with Bill Walton. And, Jerry West is the logo. He is the logo of the NBA. And it's just, it's sad. It also is kind of a reminder that this is, the legends of that era are kind of getting older. So, the Bill Walton one is the one that really hit home for me. And just because of the fact that I think, everybody has somebody in their life, whether it's a crazy uncle or a crazy aunt or that they can relate to when it comes to Bill Walton. So sad news to wake up to this morning, that's for sure.
One more thing about West, if you don't mind. Obviously, West Virginia, part of the Big 12, but back then they weren't. He was an Olympic gold medalist. What impact do you think he had more of on the NBA as a player who won one world title, played in like 6 or 8 championships, but that was the Celtics and Russell and all that, or as an executive with the Lakers, Memphis, the Clippers, and even Golden State, and won, I think, 8 titles as an executive?
I think it's probably as an executive, just because where the NBA is now, I think has a bigger cultural impact, and is something that people are going to remember more. There aren't very many people that are attuned to the NBA on a day-to-day basis that remember what Jerry West was as a player. But I think everybody that is a fan of sports, a fan of basketball, a fan of the NBA has memories of those teams that Jerry West created and helped build and help develop as a member of front offices. So I think it's as a front office member, for nothing else, because of the explosion that we've seen in what the NBA is as a product over the course of, the last 15, 20, 25 years.
What was your overall thought? That there was the recruitment of Dan Hurley. He visited L.A., and I thought that as that went on longer, and it wasn't a lengthy, try dating, but I never was surprised when he decided. I know the Lakers have the logo like the Yankees in Major League Baseball, but your thoughts about what Dan Hurley and his decision?
I always just kept coming back to the fact that he had an opportunity to leave a legacy on the sport of college basketball at UConn. He has a chance to be able to go out and win a 3rd straight national title, which is something that has not been done since Bill Walton was playing in college, which was before Dan Hurley was alive that started. So he has a chance to kind of cement his legacy as one of the greatest to ever do it, right? Like, he has a long way to go to get to the top of that mountain, but there's a path to him being the greatest college basketball coach of all time. And I don't know if you could say that as a guy that is stepping into the NBA at 52 years old for his first NBA job, that does not appear to be one where he's going to be winning a championship, right? Like that is just what I just kept coming back to with this, is that he is someone that understands the history of the sport, that appreciates the history of the sport, that understands legacy, and that comes from a family where his father is a legendary coach in the high school ranks that passed up opportunities to be a college basketball coach, to be able to stay where he was happy, to be able to stay at home, and to be able to cement a legacy for himself, not just as a coach, but as a developer of young men. And I think that that's something that matters to Hurley. And I think that he also looked at that Lakers job and kind of said to himself, like, do I really want to walk into a situation where one of the stars on this team is 40 years old, is the most powerful person, the most powerful player in the NBA, and is going to try to get his son on this team, if he is even on this team next season, and the other guy is basically made out of tissue paper? Like, is that what you really want to walk into with your first job in the NBA on the other side of the country? I don't know. It always felt like this was, I do believe that the NBA is something that really, really intrigues Dan Hurley. And I think that it's something where he wants to take a shot at it at some point. But when you have a chance to come back to college and do something that hasn't been done for more than 5 decades, and you're able to do that at home, driving distance from your parents, driving distance from all your family, driving distance from all of your wife's family, in a place where you are going to be beloved, in a place where you are never going to get fired ever, no matter what you do. I think that it's going to take a lot to get him out of UConn, and LA is just not a good enough opportunity to get him out of UConn, I think is what it comes down to.
He's obviously fiery, passionate. He is the boss at UConn, and that's obviously very debatable if that happens in the NBA, and especially with the scenario with LeBron, the Lakers, etc. Does his style win anywhere, no matter what the personalities, the ages of players might be, or is that he is perfect fit for college basketball?
Well, I mean, he is a perfect fit for college basketball, but I'm also I think that he's kind of played up this character a little bit more than it is. Like, I don't think that he is this out of control, unhinged maniac that just has no control over his emotions at all. I think that he really understands and is calculated with the way that he does, you know, the firing of the fans and the way that he goes after officials. There's no doubt that he is an intense coach when it comes to practices and when it comes to training, and when it comes to working out in the summer, and when it comes to finding a way to get better. You know, there's a certain standard of excellence that he holds himself to and holds everybody on his roster to that's not going to change no matter where he is. And if you're in the NBA, quite frankly, like, you're probably a guy that holds yourself to a similar standard. There's 550 jobs available in the NBA, and if you're one of those 550 people, you have to be wired a certain way to be able to get there and to be able to stay there. So I don't think that would necessarily be the issue, and I think that a lot of this persona that he's built up. Look, he is a big time wrestling fan, and I don't think that it's surprising that a big time wrestling fan is like, you know what, I'm going to lean into being the heel and being this character. So I think a lot of that stuff is kind of it's more like he's intense, he's passionate, he is one of the most competitive human beings that you're going to run into. But I think that overall, I think a lot of that stuff is a little bit more calculated. So that's a long-winded way of saying that I think that he would have been able to figure it out in the NBA. I think he's smart enough to know what would have worked and what would not have worked with those kids up there.
Rob Dauster, thefield68.com. They have won back-to-back. You mentioned the historical perspective of trying to win 3 in a row. Georgia was trying to do that in football, pretty darn close, and then lost to Alabama and didn't make the playoff. UConn seems to be pretty set. Recruiting was great. Players who either left or stayed or came back from the NBA draft flirtation. Are they set for what is, as far as among a handful of teams, the favorite to win it again next year?
Yeah, I think that right now at this point, they are considered a favorite because Dan Hurley is there more than necessarily they have the best roster. I think if you're just looking strictly at rosters, Kansas and Alabama are probably 1 and 2. UConn is right there, but a lot of predicting them as a top 5 team is betting on the development of guys that are currently on that roster, right? Like, you need Solo Ball, you need Jalen Stewart, you need Jaden Ross to all take a pretty big step forward. You need Alex Scarabin to go from being a good player to an All-American caliber player. But the thing is, if you look at the last 3 to 4 years in the UConn program, that's the development curve that we saw Jordan Hawkins go on, and Andre Jackson go on, and Madama Sanogo go on, and Tristan Newton go on, and Donovan Clingan go on, right? Like, they have been able to develop players within that program. And if you're betting on that happening again, which I think is a pretty good bet to make, then UConn's going to be right there in that mix. The one thing I would say is that the last 2 years, there have been 5 pros in the starting lineup for UConn each of those 2 seasons, right? And I don't think that's going to be the case this year. So I don't expect them to roll over everybody the way that they have the last 2 years. I don't think that there's going to be a significant talent advantage that they have. But I also did not think that was going to be the case last season after they lost 3 guys to the NBA. And I did not think that was going to be the case the season before when they weren't even a preseason top 25 team. So at this point, like, if you want to bet against Dan Hurley, I'm going to let everyone else be the guy that bets against Dan Hurley. I'm just going to sit here and enjoy the ride because I think that's the smart way to do this.
Can't let you go, Robin. We appreciate your time. Baylor, obviously, it's been a long time. Scott Drew, Kentucky, etc. But in the end, he stays. That was not a surprise to us, but I know how serious that was. And then on top of that, the transfer portal was good to them. We know how Scott does that. They have a heck of a recruiting class coming in, and then players who are coming back. Your thoughts in the end of what could have been very difficult and what Scott Drew and company. And yeah, they lost Alvin Brooks and lost John Jacobs, a part of his great staff, and that's part of his coaching tree now. But how he and how Baylor basketball kind of, I guess you could say, weathered the storm and ended up where they are.
Well, look, I think there is a lot to be said for coaches that understand that happiness, comfortability, being in a place where you have your family around you, being in a place where you can have the work-life balance that you want, and also knowing that you're not going to have the pressure of one bad season putting you on the hot seat is something that should be valued and appreciated, because no matter where you go, taking the Kentucky job, if you're Scott Drew, there's a level of prestige once you get there, right? But can he get paid more in Lexington than he would in Waco? Probably, but like, what's the real difference if you're making, at that level, right? Like, there's not that much difference if you're going from, let's just say, like $6 million to $8 million a year, right? Like, what's the real difference there? You're still living in the same kind of house, you're still driving the same kind of cars, you're still eating at the same places, you're still buying the same kind of fishing boat, right? And it's not like he can't accomplish the things at Baylor that he would want to be able to accomplish at Kentucky. He won a national title 3 years ago. You don't have to leave to go win a national title. You don't have to leave to make the pinnacle of the sport. So it's not necessarily a financial decision, and it's not necessarily a competitive decision. Like, is it just leaving to go feed your ego, leaving to say, hey, look, I'm good enough to get this job at Kentucky? Or is Scott the kind of guy that's going to say, hey, I've been here for 20-something years. I've built this place into what it is. They're going to erect a statue for me whenever I decide to call it quits. I'm happy here. My family's happy here. Why would I end up leaving? Mm-hmm. And I think the only argument for leaving is that, you got Kelvin Sampson at Houston. You got Phil Self at Kansas. You got Arizona coming in. Like, maybe it won't be quite as tough in the SEC, but like when you kind of look through it through that lens, that's really the only argument that I can make for leaving Baylor to go to Kentucky, if you're not just trying to live, feed your ego and take the prestige. So I kind of like that, though. Nate Oates had a couple opportunities, and he's staying at Alabama. Scott Drew had opportunities, and he's staying at Baylor. Dan Hurley had opportunities, and he's staying at UConn. Think about it like this. The Kentucky job opened, the Louisville job opened, the Arkansas job opened, the Lakers job opened. There are a lot of big jobs that have been opened in the last couple of years, and the biggest names in college basketball stayed at schools that don't have the same kind of pedigree and same kind of branding and same kind of national following, per se, right? And I do think that's a good thing for college basketball on the whole.
Rob, thank you, man. Appreciate your time. Enjoy a great summer. Rob Dauster, the Field of 68 with us.